Welcome to a special edition of the Killer Innovations Podcast, recorded during a recent speech in New York City with a group of managers and executives at Reuters. The topic of the speech, the innovation economy. I'll be right back.
This is the Killer Innovations Podcast with Phil McKinney. Keep in mind that the information and opinions expressed in this podcast are Phil's, and Phil's alone, and they don't necessarily reflect those of his past, current, or future employers. Now, here's Phil McKinney.
So first off, thanks for inviting me. I really do appreciate this as an opportunity just to have actually a face to talk to, because normally I'm standing in a bedroom or a hotel room recording a podcast, and it's a little easier to get the energy level up when you actually got faces that you can actually and actually have an interaction. So I'm going to talk 15 to 20 minutes, just kind of give you a little bit of perspective on some of the challenges that I've experienced in driving the innovation programs in my day-to-day job, but also leave a little opportunity for questions at the end. So feel free to save those up, and we'll have a lively conversation at the end. So basically what I'm going to talk about really is give you a little bit of the trends that are really driving this, some people refer to as hype on innovation. You can't go down the newsstand without seeing innovation on the front cover of some magazine. It's kind of turned into being the hot thing. But it's really towards what I refer to as the shift towards this creative economy. We see this fundamental shift from the industrial economy to the knowledge information economy towards this shift in the creative economy. And what's really driving that, and what does that really mean for businesses, and how are they going to shift and change to be able to take advantage of that? Talk a little bit about some of the key enablers that I have found that have been incredibly helpful in the innovation programs that we run. Also, talk a little bit about how do you create a culture of innovation, albeit in my organization, it's 150,000 employees, but you still have to work at the culture issues of innovation. It's incredibly challenging. It's not easy, but there's certain things that we have found that have just been helpful in order to really get the full passion of all of the employees to be excited about the opportunity to help drive and create new businesses. And then also at the end, what's really the rewards? What's at the end of the goal line with a successful program? So what are some of the trends that are really driving this shift towards the creative economy? Well, let's face it. If you look at the Dow 30 today, right? You guys, I'm telling you something most of you guys know more than I even do, given the business that Reuters is in. But when you look at how many businesses that are on the Dow 30 today that were on the Dow 30 when it was first created, right? I think basically it's GE is the only one. And actually GE fell off and went back on the list twice during the history of the Dow 30. What does that tell you? Change is inevitable. What we're facing today is just this accelerated change. Competition's getting tougher. The markets and information is becoming more liquid. You're finding the situation where it's harder and harder to create those sustained differentiations, those things that customers value and that are willing to pay a premium for, translated into higher margin numbers. And how do you do that? Also, we're seeing the shift towards offshoring, more and more jobs moving offshore as, quote, the knowledge economy makes the shift. And we're all kind of comfortable with the shift of IT to offshoring, but now we're seeing the shift of doctors, offshoring of medical. So many of you may not realize, if you go into a hospital these days and you get an x-ray and the doctor reads the x-ray in the emergency room, the overnight second opinion of that x-ray to make sure the first doctor didn't miss anything is typically being done offshore these days. It's not being done inside the hospital. They've offshored those second opinions of x-rays as a first step towards offshoring medical. And now we're seeing, for instance, in this week's issue of Business Week, a whole article on the offshoring of lawyers and legal. Now, that could be a good thing. I affectionately refer to the legal department as the business prevention department. And by the way, they listen to the podcast, so I'm going to hear about this when they hear the podcast. But this shift, so people tend to think that our jobs and how we operate our businesses are pretty secure. We've done it the same way for many, many years. Guess what? Things that you traditionally would not think that are going to go offshore are going to go offshore. How do you react to that? I talked a little bit before about this shift from the industrial economy to the knowledge economy to this creative, what we call the creative economy. And what's really driving this is that when you can quantify anybody's jobs and tasks down to something that can be trained, taught at the college level, or that can be taught on the job and that can be repeated, those become immediate candidates to be driven as kind of that offshore drive. But let's face it, the creative economy is really about individuals. It's not about so much the business, but it's about you as an individual. So how many people in here would you quantify yourself as being highly creative? We got a couple. We kind of get the little hands going, right? Here's an interesting test that I did. Go into a kindergarten class in today's schools, and you ask how many of these kids want to be artists when they grow up. Every one of their hands goes up. Now you ask that same question for first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, and the number gets down to the point where the kids that are just getting ready to go into high school, and you ask them how many want to be artists, you might get one that kind of raises their hand, right? Because part of the challenge we have is that the education system has beat the creativity out in many cases. We're taught to memorize, to conform, to fit into the predefined structures that the educational system has defined for us growing up and for our kids that are in the educational system today. But what I can tell you today is everybody in this room, if I had a one-on-one session with you for 2 hours, you would walk out of that session, and when I asked you if you thought of yourself as being highly creative, you'd have your hand raised. Creativity is a skill, just as being able to do, putting together a PowerPoint presentation, learning how to use a piece of software, learning how to read a financial report. Creativity is a skill that can be taught, you can be practiced, and you can become very proficient at it depending on how often you practice it, like any other skill. The shift here in this creative economy is the fact that it's about ideas. It's not about how to build something, manufacturing. It's not about process and how do I do something. It's about the generation of ideas. And really the key for the creative economy is you as an individual, is how are you going to be able to unlock your ability to generate ideas, not only for your personal life, but also for your career. And part of this shift towards this term innovation is really around how do I unlock the creativity of employees to drive impact to the business. And the best example of this is really a recent Harvard study. Harvard Business Review, they went out and they did a study of 108 companies and looked at impact of R&D spend to impact of the business. So in the case of an R&D spend across these companies, 82% of the R&D spend was what we would call kind of traditional core into the business. 18% on average is what was spent on driving new innovation, new business models, new technologies, products, services, value chains, whatever. The interesting thing is of that 18% of R&D spend, that translated into 37% of the revenue. So that 18% R&D spend translated into 37% of the R&D. Now, that 18% of R&D spend translated into 68% of the margin for those businesses. Why? The theory being is that if you can go off and create something that's clearly a better mousetrap, your customers are more willing to pay you a higher margin premium to get to that mousetrap for their own benefit. So creating sustained differentiation, barriers to entry to competition, investing those R&D dollars, those innovation programs in a smart way, allow you then to drive up that margin benefit to the business. And believe me, how I get measured in the innovation program office is margin impact. I have to sit down and I have to show the R&D spend we did 2 years ago, the R&D spend we did a year ago, the R&D spend we're doing now, and how is those R&D spends objectively impacted the margin improvement on the business. And so the other point, though, is also to make sure that you understand that it isn't just about business or just about Reuters. It's also about your career. The market's changing. I mean, my father-in-law and my father were tightly, from a career-wise, very tied in with the steel industry through the 60s and 70s. Both resisted the shift from manufacturing to that information and knowledge economy, and my wife and I both saw our fathers suffer as a result of that because they couldn't make the shift in the careers. We're early in this shift towards the creative economy, so each of you have to take ownership of that career shift to understand what is it that you need to do from a career perspective in order not to be caught up in that same shift that happened in the 60s and 70s. Time, yes, there's time. It's still fairly early in this shift, but it's also not a guarantee that the traditional Western countries are going to be the winners in this creative economy. Take Tata in India, for instance, is fighting hard to be able to win a contract with one of the major auto manufacturers to do the entire concept, design, factory plant manufacturing of a new car for one of the major auto plants. Well, that's a big shift when you think about that. Every major auto manufacturer worldwide has one of their major design centers in the U.S. Toyota, Nissan, even overseas ones have placed their design centers here in the U.S. So all of a sudden now you even think about design as being in the creative economy space, and that potentially also shifting. So it's not a guarantee that Western countries are going to be the ones that are even going to win in this space. So it's going to be highly competitive. So what are some of the key enablers from the standpoint of an organization? So my team in the Innovation Program Office is driving things that fall outside of what we call the core investment, core business. So what we use inside of my organization, we call a 70-20-10 investment model. 70% of the dollars go to the core business. I don't manage that. The R&D teams drive their core business. The next version of a product comes out of that. The continuing innovation along a product comes out of 70%. 20% of the R&D spend is focused on what we call adjacencies or differentiators. So taking a core product but going off and attacking a new opportunity, a new market, a new customer segment, a new geography, a new value, slightly change to the value chain and how that product gets delivered. And then 10% is fundamentally something new. Something that you would look at and go, oh my God, where'd that come from? That's not anything like the businesses that we're in today. So my focus is on from an innovation perspective, is that 20 and 10. The core business, the business knows how to do that better than I do. I can't help them turn the crank any faster. They can take those dollars and best apply it. My focus is how do I create margin improvement and growth opportunities for the business overall. But what's some of the key enablers in order to be successful in that 20 and 10 part of the investment? A skilled workforce around creativity. It's hard to find people that recognize their own ability to be creative, to understand their role and how they can impact these in the development of innovations, or finding people that you're going to hire in from the college, from colleges and universities. Today, creativity and innovation is not on the core curriculum at universities. So the key that we do is that we actually are willing to make the investment in our employees and train them to help them unlock what it is they have as just a natural ability. We are creative beings. We like to create. We were kids. We took Play-Doh. We created. We had erector sets. We create. We're creative beings by nature. The key is how do we go back and unlock that? One of the other key enablers is executive support. This isn't, the fad of the month, type of a program, which you see in a lot of companies. Some executive goes off and goes to a weekend seminar or picks up the New York Times bestseller business book and reads it over the weekend and then comes in and now it's the new fad of the month. You need to have clear executive support. Myself, I'm in the benefit that everything from the CEO and down into my organization is clearly aligned. The other is that you have to have a culture of innovation. Now, what does it mean by a culture of innovation? One is you have to recognize the strategic importance. You have to have a program to educate the employees on why innovation is important to the business. The other thing, and this is probably the hardest thing for managers, is you have to reward the successes and the failures. And that's the hardest part, because we tend to look at failures as being a mistake. Somebody did something wrong. They were not, it was something about the team or the individual, why it didn't succeed. The key here is in a culture of innovation, you have to reward the successes, and you have to reward, not punish, the failures. And you have to do that publicly. And that's a tough thing for organizations to do. You want to reward people for taking risks. Not insane risks, but for just going out there and stepping out there and giving it a good try. Next, you also have to have an innovation process. You have to have, it just can't be haphazard, get 8 people in a room, let's brainstorm on a flip chart, come up with 20 ideas. Let's face it, we've all done that, right? Let's get 15 of our brightest people in a room, let's have a brainstorming session. So all be the scribe, people document it right down on the flip chart. What happens? Nothing, right? 99% of brainstorming sessions, absolutely zero comes out of it. Someone writes it down, they tear them off, they go back, I'll document them, they put them in an email, they send them out to anybody, nothing happens, right? Nobody ever does anything with them. Well, why? Because there's no way to rank order those. What are the ones that are going to have the highest impact, the least impact? There's no guarantee that the executives are actually going to go do something, right? So we've all done this enough times that we get the email saying, hey, come to conference room A, we're going to have a brainstorming session, I'll provide the pizzas over lunch. And people show up, but from the standpoint of actually driving impact, there's been no results. So whatever the methodology is, there's thousands of them out there. I would encourage you to think about doing ones that best fit your organization. This is not a one-size-fits-all. It is not a situation where, I can tell you, use a methodology and you're going to have, the breakout results. You've got to adapt it to your organization, to your culture, and the way your people operate. The other is you got to have measurements. Having where you just go off and do these ideas, and you got these projects off running, doing their thing. You've got to be able to be held accountable. Running an innovation program and not wanting to be held accountable is somewhat counterintuitive. Because what happens then is innovation gets viewed as being, that's the group that you go hide in because you really don't have to ever deliver results from, right? Some of the measurements that I get measured on, they may or may not apply to your business, is really about impact to gross margin. So R&D dollars translated impact to gross margin. Why? Because gross margin translates into customers willing to pay the premium. Senior executives have got to go worry about the overhead structure, whether or not too many people or IT costs are too high, and all the things that get you down to operating profit. But what you can measure innovation impact is what is the impact of that innovation programs to gross margin? Was the customer really willing to pay a premium to get that service over what it costs you to deliver that service? That's the number one measurement I get held on a quarterly basis. Impact to operating profit, we look at that, but it's harder and harder from the standpoint that the Innovation Program Office doesn't control a lot of the overhead expenses that occur in the business. That's part of other parts of the organization, but albeit we do drive to that. And then we also use it as our innovation as a percentage of revenue. And the reason we use that number is not to say whether we're spending too much or too little, but it's to benchmark ourselves against the competition, to understand, are we within range of those that are in the same businesses that we are? And then benchmark. Now, the objective of benchmarking is not to determine that you want to get into the middle. We're challenged to create a benchmark that is best in the universe. And that's the challenge that's laid out before us. So it isn't about being parity with the competition, but how do you create yourself, how do you position yourself from a benchmark? How do you translate innovation investment to such a high impact on margin that competition will never be able to catch you? And then last, you have to have an innovation network. You can't do it all yourself. 150,000 employees, $3.5 billion of R&D. You'd think I could have access to do just about anything I'd want to go do, but it's still not enough. So right now, we actually target within our innovation program that 60% of our innovation programs are done internal, 40% of our innovations come from external, whether that's investments, acquisitions, partnering with our key technology partners, Microsoft, Intel, all the ones we work with. But we target 60% coming from internal and 40% coming from external. And believe me, why the number? The number is purely arbitrary. There wasn't any science behind we got to the number. But the number was driven in order to force the organization to think differently, forcing our people to get outside the four walls and go see what other people are doing that potentially could come back and roll back into the organization. Real quick, how do you create a culture of innovation? So one is I talked about before, is you got to embrace your own creativity. If you're going to be pushing an innovation agenda within your organizations, or if you're just in the process of saying, hey, is this innovation thing for real, or is this another one of these management fads, you've got to look at yourself internally and say, how do I fit into this? How do I unlock my own ability to contribute to the process? Not that I'm just going to be a manager, looking at benefits back to my teams, or how do I make my people more innovative, but how do you become part of the innovation culture within the organization? The other is that you got to get comfortable with change. Most of us would prefer to have the same, we get up in the morning, get up, get dressed, go to work, do the job, go home. There's also some of us that grates against us. We want to be out there, we want to make change, we want to see impact, we want to see results of what it is we're trying to drive. The issue here is that you got to get comfortable with change, and the fact that change is accelerating. The job you're doing today will not be the same job you're doing tomorrow. It wasn't the same job you were doing 2 years ago, and the rate of change is going at such an accelerated pace. The other thing is that you got to deal with what I call the anchors. These are people within the organization that absolutely are not going to change. And you can't ignore them. You can't believe that they're not there. You got to deal with them. I kind of refer to them sometimes as the negative corporate antibodies that come out of the woodwork and attack anything new that's going on inside the organization. And they're busy trying to grab everything and pull you back. No, that's not the way we do things here. You got to deal with them. Particularly if you're in a management role, you got to be willing to fight the battles. It's easy to give up. After you pounded your head against the wall that 15th, 16th, 600th, 1,000th time against the wall, you got to be committed not to give up. You got to continue to fight. Because otherwise, the culture will never take hold, and you won't see the transformation that's really possible within your organization. The other is that you got to clear the roadblocks. What I tend to find and what I get with my teams is that probably 50 to 75% of their time is not actually running the program, but it's actually trying to navigate around all the roadblocks that different organizations within the corporation put in the way to prevent it from being successful. Oh, nope, IT's got this. You need some IT support for this program. Oh, no, IT's got this requirement. You got to do the spec. You got to fit into the budget, and it's a 6-month lead time. So the whole project comes to a screeching halt because you're dependent on IT. And I'm seeing a lot of people going, and I see a lot of head nodding. And I could talk because I was a CIO. I spent 5 years as a CIO at a publicly traded telecom carrier. So I was the bad guy on the other side of the table. So perspective gives you a fresh look every once in a while. But the key here is that you got to figure out a way to get outside the roadblocks. In my organization, my teams have the freedom to go out and get it done outside. Completely, they can go out, they can skunk work it however they need to go skunk work it, but their objective is they've got to complete these programs and show margin return or margin benefit from it. That requires a whole different corporate philosophy to give you the freedom to be able to go do those kinds of things. And believe me, this is a constant battle even for me. And again, I can't underemphasize the issues of if you want to create a culture, reward. Recognize and reward what people are doing when they go above and beyond the call of duty. In my organization, it's very easy for me to drive rewards. Engineers like to see their ideas result in products that you as a customer of ours go onto the shelf. There's nothing prouder for an engineer to be able to walk his kids down the line at Best Buy and say, that's my product. I built that, and that's a great product. So for me, it's finding out what are the rewards on an individual basis. What makes the teams tick? What is that personal motivation that's going to allow them to unleash their passion for the benefit of the business? Whether that is being able to say, I built that, to see impact on customers, be able to get feedback, whatever it is, you got to invest the time. What is it that motivates it? For me, it's easy. All my engineers all think the same way. If I can show them how to take their idea and how I'm going to fund it, I'm going to be their executive sponsor. I'm going to protect them from the antibodies, and I'm going to put their project on a fast track and deliver that as a commercial product to the marketplace. Huge rewards. I've got people lining up outside my door trying to get their ideas into the funnel and to get them funded. And the way we work in the Innovation Program Office is any employee can submit an idea. If that idea gets funded, that employee has the option to come with their idea and stay with it all the way through. And then when that quote gets commercially launched, that whole team goes back to our business unit, and they become the owner of that product back into the business unit. So it's a way for people to be able to take their own entrepreneurial spirits, unleash them, but unleash them within the corporation without feeling compelled that they have to leave because the company can't support what it is they're trying to achieve on a personal basis. So right now we have about 20 programs in the pipeline, and 100% of my staff today all come from people who brought their ideas. None of them are ideas that I've generated or my team has generated that's driving the IPO and then trying to recruit people to work on the team. All the 100% of the ideas that are in the funnel all came from people who are highly passionate about those ideas. So with that, just want to close and just reinforcing it. Change is happening. It's happening at a faster pace. The move to the creative economy is in the early stages. You need to think about it from your personal, career-wise, but also from what its impact is going to be to Reuters. You have a choice. You can either define your role in the new economy, or the role is going to be defined for you by somebody else who's figured it out ahead of you. So your choice is either you can define it or it's going to get defined for you. And the key here is that you got to be willing to break out. You got to be willing to do things differently. You got to be willing to look at the business differently. You got to change perspectives. And there's a whole talk I can talk about changing perspectives. It's the hardest skill to learn, to look at your own business differently than you look at it today because we get caught in the ruts. You got to break out. You got to think differently, and you got to be creative. And the results, both from a personal perspective, but also on Reuters, can be significant. It can be things that you can't even imagine today from a standpoint of overall impact to the business. And that is the satisfaction that you get from the standpoint of seeing your ideas result in impact in the marketplace. Thank you. Thanks for listening to this week's special edition of the Killer Innovations Podcast. For the show notes, links to articles and blogs on the latest thinking on innovation, or to participate in the conversation with the rest of the Killer Innovation listeners, visit killerinnovations.com. Send your feedback or your questions about the podcast to podcast@killerinnovations.com. Feel free to join my LinkedIn network. Send an invite to podcast@killerinnovations.com. Please make sure to say that you are a listener of the podcast. Don't forget to vote for your favorite podcast over at podcastalley.com, Podcast Pickle, or your favorite podcast directory. And thanks again for listening to this week's special edition of the Killer Innovations Podcast. We'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.